I never imagined I'd find myself working at a fashion store. Growing up, my dreams were filled with vibrant colors, wild designs, and shimmering fabrics that danced in my imagination. However, reality had a way of curtailing those dreams, forcing me onto a path I hadn't anticipated. So, when I landed a job at Elegance and Style, a quaint little clothing shop nestled in the heart of the bustling city, I figured I could make the best of it. My boss, a stern yet enigmatic woman named Mrs. Lacey, had owned the store for over a decade, and she often spoke in hushed tones about the rules of the shop, creating an atmosphere of mystery and intrigue. To say the store was unique would be an understatement. It was an old building, with creaky wooden floors and walls adorned with vintage mannequins that seemed to have witnessed decades of fashion trends come and go. The air was thick with the scent of fabric and the faintest hint of something else, something unsettling. However, the most disconcerting of all was the headless mannequin, a centerpiece designed by the shop's previous owner, Harold. The first time I laid eyes on it, I was captivated yet terrified. It stood tall, draped in an elegant dress that fluttered as if whispering secrets of the past. But Mrs. Lacey had a strict rule: every night, we had to remove the mannequin's head and lock it away in a glass cabinet in the back room, a ritual that felt increasingly odd with each passing day. "Why do we need to do that?" I asked one evening during my shift, curiosity getting the better of me. Mrs. Lacey's eyes darkened, a shadow crossing her face as she leaned closer, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "Harold left a curse behind when he passed away. Every night, the mannequin's head possesses a dark energy, and you cannot let it stay attached after hours. Trust me, it's for your own good." I dismissed it as an old superstition, something to entertain the new employees while keeping them in line. Deep down, however, a part of me felt an unease whenever I approached the mannequin at closing time. It was a sensation I couldn't shake, like someone was watching me from the shadows, a presence lurking just beyond my line of sight. Then, Justin joined us. He was a fresh-faced kid, eager and brimming with confidence, the kind of person who thrived on new experiences and challenges. During one of our late shifts, I noticed he seemed oddly drawn to the headless mannequin, his fascination palpable and unsettling. I warned him about Mrs. Lacey's rules, but Justin just chuckled, brushing off my concerns with a wave of his hand. "Come on, it's just a mannequin." "You seriously believe in that stuff?" he teased, tossing his midnight black hair back in a way that suggested he was entirely unfazed by the warnings. One evening, as we prepared to close up for the night, I noticed Justin lingering by the mannequin longer than usual, inspecting it with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You really shouldn't mess with it," I cautioned, my voice barely above a whisper, but he either didn't hear me or chose to ignore my warning. Instead, he reached up, pushing the head back onto the mannequin's neck with a cheeky grin that sent a chill racing down my spine. "See? Nothing's happening," he said, a smirk dancing on his lips, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the air. I felt a chill race down my spine, but as the moments passed and nothing seemed to transpire, I let my worry dissolve into annoyance. Maybe I was being paranoid. We locked up for the night, the streets outside whispering with the sounds of distant city life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the tension that had settled in my stomach like a heavy weight. My dreams were plagued with visions of the mannequin, its headless form stalking through dimly lit aisles, coming for me, its empty gaze filled with malice. I awoke in a cold sweat, the sound of my heart pounding echoing in the otherwise silent room, the remnants of my nightmare clinging to me like a shroud. The next few days came and went uneventfully, but a growing sense of dread hung in the air like a storm cloud. Justin continued to tease the mannequin, and I noticed he was becoming more reckless in his disdain for the rules. The store's atmosphere shifted somehow, turning darker and more oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in on us. After a week, I returned to the store after my day off, expecting lively chatter and the familiar smell of new fabric. Instead, I was met with an eerie silence that sent shivers down my spine. Mrs. Lacey was absent, which was odd and unsettling. As I busied myself arranging the racks, trying to shake off the chill, I heard a thud from the back room. My heart raced, a primal fear rooting me to my spot. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach, but finally decided to check it out, compelled by a mix of curiosity and concern. As I turned the corner, I saw a figure sprawled on the floor. My stomach dropped as I recognized Justin's face, pale and lifeless, surrounded by a puddle of crimson that seemed to spread like a dark flower. My skin prickled as I took in the horrific scene. The mannequin stood unnaturally still in the corner, its head missing, the air feeling thick, almost suffocating, and I stumbled backward in horror, my mind racing to comprehend what had just unfolded. "Justin!" I screamed, rushing to his side, my hands shaking as I felt for a pulse, praying for any sign of life. There was none. His once vibrant skin was now ashen, a look of terror etched onto his features, frozen in fear. The blood pooled around him like a macabre halo, pooling beneath the mannequin that now felt sinister and alive, an ominous presence that filled the room with dread. Time seemed to warp as I stumbled to my feet, panic surging within me like a tidal wave. I couldn't comprehend how this could happen. The store felt more like a tomb than a place of business, a graveyard for lost souls. My mind raced with frantic thoughts. Had he disobeyed the curse? What had he done to deserve this? I scrambled to call for help, but the phone line was dead, a lifeless silence marking my desperation. I tried the front door, but it was locked tight as if an unseen force held it shut, trapping me in this nightmare. The realization that we might be trapped in this harbinger of doom tightened around my chest like a vice, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Frantic and desperate, I turned back to Justin's body, wishing I could wake him from some terrible nightmare. As I crouched down, my gaze flickered to the mannequin. In that moment, everything shifted. It was as if the air itself had changed, thick with an oppressive energy that made my skin crawl. The head, which had been missing, was suddenly perched atop the mannequin again, a grotesque display that turned my stomach with its distorted features. I stumbled back, but the moment I did, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness before illuminating it again in a strobe-like fashion. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and curling around me like tendrils of darkness, wrapping me in their cold embrace. A chilling laugh echoed eerily from the depths of the store, causing me to freeze in place, my instincts screaming at me to run. I staggered away, heart pounding, breathing heavily as I backed towards the front door, my hands trembling as I desperately rattled the knob, praying for any semblance of freedom. My eyes darted back toward Justin, and there was something amiss, something terribly wrong. No longer was he lying lifeless on the floor. He sat upright, eyes wide with terror, but they were empty, hollow, devoid of life. I screamed, a sound lost in the reshaping chaos around me, my voice swallowed by the darkness. The mannequin began to move, the lifeless head twisting ever so slightly in my direction, its gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that paralyzed me. "It's a trick of the light," I told myself, trying to rationalize the terror spiraling around me, but I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just the darkness playing games. A primal instinct kicked in, propelling me toward a rear exit I had previously overlooked, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating despair. I made my way through the labyrinth of clothing racks, the shadows whispering secrets I didn't want to hear, their voices a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. My heart thundered in my chest, urging me to run faster, to escape the nightmare that had engulfed me. The laughter echoed again, bouncing off the walls, growing louder as I stumbled backward, desperation clawing at my throat. Pushing through the back door, I erupted into the alleyway, gasping for air as the cool night enveloped me like a protective blanket. I fell to the ground, chest heaving, struggling to process the horror that had unfolded, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Once out of the store, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over me, but I knew deep in my bones that it wouldn't end here. Something had been unleashed, something that craved the souls of the living, and I had narrowly escaped its grasp. Days turned to weeks, but the horror of that night clung to me like a shadow at noon, refusing to let me go. I learned from a local news report that the store had closed indefinitely, employees mysteriously vanishing into thin air, only to remain as whispers of their former selves, echoes of laughter trapped in the void. I moved to a new city, leaving elegance and style behind, but in the silence of the night, I could still hear that laughter echoing, a haunting reminder of what I had witnessed. In my dreams, I was met with the hollow stare of Justin and the mocking gaze of the headless mannequin, their presence a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. Even 3 years later, I still find myself checking my surroundings, fearful that the past might come knocking on my door once more, a sinister reminder of my encounter with the unknown. There are forces beyond our understanding, lurking in the mundane, waiting for the right moment to teach us the dangers of ignoring the rules that protect us from the horrors that lie in wait in the dark, ready to ensnare the unwary and the foolish. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. In my everyday life, I find myself working as a car salesman, navigating through a rather mundane routine that rarely changes from day to day. My hours are spent in the showroom, where I greet customers with a friendly smile and pitch them the latest car models, hoping to make a sale. However, on that particular day, an unusual tension hung in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I walked into the showroom, my eyes landed on an old Buick parked in the corner, and a wave of unease washed over me, lingering in the back of my mind. The Buick looked a bit worn down, its once shiny body now covered in patches of rust, while the sleek, trendy models surrounding it seemed to overshadow its presence. Just then, an unexpected visitor walked into the showroom. He appeared quite ordinary at first glance, dressed in a weathered jacket that had seen better days, his white hair glimmering under the bright showroom lights. But it was his eyes that struck me the most, deep and heavy, filled with an inexplicable sense of sorrow and longing that captivated my attention. He walked straight towards the old Buick, his gaze fixed on it with an odd mix of nostalgia and melancholy. I approached him, attempting to break the silence that enveloped us. "This car is a classic," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Sure, it shows its age, but it's still worth a look." He flashed a brief smile, but it quickly faded, replaced by an indescribable worry that shadowed his features. "I know," he replied softly, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he were reluctant to share more details. Yet, I found myself drawn in by the emotion in his expression. "My daughter liked this kind of car." He paused, taking a deep breath as if gathering his thoughts. "But now she's missing." Hearing those words sent a chill down my spine, and a wave of unease washed over me. "Missing? Can you tell me more?" I asked carefully, trying to keep my composure in the face of such a heavy revelation. His eyes darkened, as if those hidden memories were tearing at his soul, revealing a deep well of anguish. "Her name was Emily, a lively and lovely girl. A few weeks ago, she went out with friends, and I haven't seen her since." His voice trembled, filled with profound despair, and I could sense the weight of his grief pressing down on him. As our conversation deepened, he began to reminisce about the moments he had shared with his daughter. His wife had passed away when Emily was very young, and she had become his whole world, the only light in his life that brought him joy. But now, that light was fading into endless darkness, leaving behind a void that felt impossible to fill. I keep thinking, did I do something wrong? He suddenly grabbed my shoulder, his eyes flashing with a wild intensity that made my heart race. I know she might be in some trouble. How am I supposed to face this? What can I do if she's hurting? His brow furrowed deeply, revealing the pain etched on his face, and I could see the turmoil brewing within him. I'm so sorry. You must miss her a lot. I struggled to find the right words, unsure how to comfort a father who was clearly in such distress. It's okay, young man, he said, releasing my shoulder and looking me straight in the eye, a fierce determination reflected in his gaze. Sometimes, I even think about using a gun to find those who hurt her, to end all this pain once and for all. In that moment, my heart nearly stopped. No, I wanted to stop him, to pull him back from the edge of that dark thought, but I found myself lost in his despair. The moral compass I was familiar with became blurry, and the inner conflict swirled around me like a vortex, catching my unguarded soul in its grip. The old man seemed to lose all sense of reason in an instant, his eyes flickering with rage and desperation. My mind raced, trying to find a way to respond to his raw emotions. That's not the solution. We need to get some help, call the police, or maybe reach out to other organizations that specialize in this kind of situation. As those words slipped out, I felt like I was subconsciously making excuses for him, trying to redirect his anger into something more productive. Oh, young man, you just don't understand, he replied, his voice low and heavy, like the shadows of night creeping in. These people are dark, they're not to be trusted. They'll just look at my daughter's disappearance with indifference. They won't understand a father's pain like I do. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, mixed with sympathy, as I struggled to find the right words to say. But you can't let your emotions dictate your actions. This situation calls for reason and a clear head. My voice trembled, hoping to calm him down a bit, but I could sense the storm brewing within him. Reason? He scoffed, his emotions bursting forth like a dam breaking. How I wish there was something rational to think about in this cold, indifferent world. But if I can't find her, then who will save her? Who will even care? An invisible weight filled the air between us, making it hard to breathe. The old man's eyes burned with despair and doubt, and I felt myself being pulled in, my own fear and guilt intertwining with his. In that moment, I realized I couldn't easily distance myself from others anymore, and the moral dilemma he faced resonated deeply within me. You need to calm down, I tried to speak firmly, hoping to quell this emotional storm that threatened to overwhelm us both. But I knew that the more I tried to persuade him, the weaker I felt inside. Because, no matter what, I had also lost my way in life and made countless irrational decisions that haunted me. Have you ever messed up something important? He suddenly asked, a slight smirk creeping onto his face, tinged with irony and pain. In moments like this, have you ever thought about paying for your mistakes? About the costs of your inaction? His words struck a chord deep within me. Every single thing I'd done, every choice I'd made felt like an invisible chain binding me, holding me back from moving forward. I had my own regrets too, like pushing away those who genuinely cared for me or choosing to run away when opportunities knocked at my door. As our conversation continued, I found myself getting wrapped up in his longing and guilt for his daughter. Every time he mentioned Emily, my heart swelled with guilt and sadness. I remembered the times I had distanced myself from my family, moments I could have acted to mend what was broken, to reach out and reconnect. I don't know how to help you, but I think I want to make up for my mistakes, I finally said, mustering the courage after a struggle within myself. Even though I didn't know where to start, I felt a warmth creeping into my heart, a sense of purpose beginning to take root. The old man's expression softened gradually, a glimmer of light appearing in his eyes, as if my words had struck a chord with him. "Will you help me?" His voice was low and earnest, filled with a desperate hope that made my heart ache. I didn't know how to respond immediately, overwhelmed by the weight of his request. I nodded, even though my heart was filled with fear and uncertainty. But I understood that this fear was what reignited my courage. His burden made me realize that the meaning of life isn't just about money and status. It's about the connections we share with others and the responsibilities we carry for those we love. I decided then and there to help him find his daughter. I began using all my resources, reaching out to the police, social networks, and even volunteer organizations dedicated to missing persons. Every day, I followed him through every corner of the city, where memories of Emily lingered in the air, even if only briefly, blooming like a flower in his heart. As time passed, Emily's figure began to materialize in our minds, her laughter echoing in our ears, reminding us to hold on to hope and not give up. Throughout this process, I finally realized that what I had considered a mundane life was actually a series of choices and responsibilities that shaped who I was. Although we never found her, the bond between me and this father deepened in ways I never expected, and I understood that every choice in life can alter our fate and that of others. The true meaning behind these choices lies in responsibility and love, the connections we forge and the impact we have on one another. In the end, we finally found a lead, perhaps left by one of Emily's friends, a glimmer of hope in our search for answers. Even though the road ahead remained tough and fraught with uncertainty, I knew we had to keep pushing forward. It was during this solitary journey that I learned how to confront the fears deep within me and how to take on the responsibilities I owed not just to him, but to myself as well. This journey changed my life in ways I could never have anticipated, making me acutely aware of the fragility of life and the sincerity of emotions that bind us all. I realized that my efforts were not just for others, but also for my own redemption, a chance to find my way back to a sense of purpose. Though the old man had experienced immense sorrow, he taught me that the greatest meaning of life lies in the connections we share with one another and the courage that emerges in times of hardship, reminding us that we are never truly alone in our struggles. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. It was late afternoon when I found myself navigating the twisting and overgrown backroads of rural Kentucky, the sun hanging low in the sky like a weary traveler yearning to rest. My car's tires crunched over the gravel as I drove deeper into the unspoiled wilderness, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets of ancient times to one another, their leaves rustling gently in the soft breeze. After what felt like hours of driving, I spotted a faded and weathered sign that read The Forgotten Inn, a quaint name that felt oddly inviting amidst the encroaching shadows that began to stretch longer as day turned to dusk. As I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the tires of my car kicked up clouds of dust, and I parked with a growing mix of relief and trepidation. The inn loomed before me, an old wooden structure that had clearly seen better days in its long existence. Its paint was peeling in places, and the windows were clouded with age, giving it a ghostly appearance. However, the flickering neon open sign in the window suggested a semblance of life within its walls, a magnet for weary travelers like myself. I hesitated for a moment, an inexplicable chill crawling up my spine at the sight of the neglected building, but fatigue urged me forward. I needed a place to rest my weary bones and recharge for the journey ahead. Upon entering, the musty scent of old wood and mildew hit me like a wave, mixing with the stale air within the lobby. The lobby was dimly lit, practically shrouded in shadows, with a single flickering bulb hanging overhead, casting ghostly patterns on the walls. Behind the counter stood a woman who seemed to embody the inn itself, worn, yet strangely captivating and enigmatic. Her hair was a tangled mess, giving her an air of disarray, and her uniform was outdated, suggesting she might have been a fixture in this place for years. But it was her eyes that unsettled me the most. They were too wide, almost unnaturally so, and there was a knowing look in them, as if she could see right through me, piercing my very soul. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth yet laced with an underlying tension that sent a shiver down my spine. "What brings you to our little corner of the world?" "I'm just passing through," I replied, trying to sound casual, as I handed her my ID, my heart racing slightly. "A night's stay would be great." I could feel her gaze linger on me, weighing something I couldn't quite discern. She smiled, but the warmth that came from her lips did not reach her eyes. "Room 3 is available." "It's a cozy little spot," she assured, handing me the key, its metal cold and heavy in my palm as if infused with a lingering chill. Climbing the creaky staircase to my room, I felt a palpable sense of foreboding settle over me, a heaviness that enveloped me like a cloak. "Room 3. The number echoed in my mind, a drumbeat of unease that I couldn't shake. I opened the door to reveal a small, sparsely furnished space that lacked the comforts I had hoped for. The bed was unmade, the sheets wrinkled and rumpled, and the curtains fluttered slightly as if stirred by an unseen breeze that chilled the air. I tossed my bag onto the bed and took a moment to collect my thoughts, attempting to quell the rising sense of discomfort. As darkness fell outside, cloaking the world in an inky shroud, I decided to explore the inn a bit. I wandered through the dimly lit hallways, the creaky floorboards beneath me groaning in protest. Strange shadows danced along the walls, flickering in the corners of my vision like long-forgotten memories, but I dismissed them as mere tricks of the light. I made my way to the common area, where an old fireplace stood, its hearth cold and empty, echoing the eerie silence of the inn. That's when I noticed the portraits hanging on the walls, old photographs of guests who had stayed there long ago. They all wore expressions of joy, smiles frozen in time, but their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, an unsettling sensation crawling beneath my skin. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I quickly turned away, deciding it was best to retreat to the safety of my room. As I settled into bed, the weight of the day began to press upon me, lulling me into a restless sleep that left me vulnerable to nightmares. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a strange sound, a soft, almost melodic whispering that seemed to seep through the very walls around me. I strained to listen, hoping to understand the words, but they were indistinguishable, blending into a haunting lullaby that sent chills racing down my spine and invaded my thoughts. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest, and glanced around the suffocating darkness of the room. The shadows seemed to thicken, creeping closer as if alive and watching me with malevolent intent. I tried to shake off the fear, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, but then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A shadowy figure stood at the foot of my bed, barely illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window like a wisp of smoke. I blinked, and in that instant, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a profound sense of panic. My breath quickened, and a wave of desperation surged within me. I stumbled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor as I rushed toward the door. I needed to find the woman from the front desk, to seek reassurance in her presence, as irrational as it felt. I threw open the door and dashed down the hallway, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, wrapping around me like a dark shroud. When I reached the lobby, it was empty, void of any comforting presence. The flickering light above cast eerie shadows across the room that seemed to dance mockingly in the corners. I called out, my voice trembling, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed back, swallowed by the suffocating silence that enveloped the room. Just then, the woman emerged from the shadows, her expression unreadable and eerie. "Did you hear them?" she asked, her voice low and almost conspiratorial, as if sharing a dreadful secret. "Hear what?" I replied, my heart racing, each beat reverberating in my ears like a warning bell. The whispers, she said, stepping closer, her intent gaze piercing through my feigned bravado. They come for those who stay too long. What do you mean? I stammered, confusion and fear battling for control within me as the realization of her words began to sink in. They are the souls of those who never left, she murmured, her eyes reflecting a flicker of something dark, something ancient. You mustn't linger. It's not safe here. A sense of dread washed over me, a chilling understanding creeping into my thoughts as her words settled like stones in my gut. I turned to flee, but the shadows in the room seemed to congeal, forming shapes that reached for me like grasping hands. Panic surged through me, my heart racing as I felt the cold breath of the darkness brush against my skin, an icy whisper trailing along my neck. Help! I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the suffocating silence. The woman stood there, her smile now sinister, watching as the shadows closed in, hungry and relentless. In a moment of sheer instinct, I bolted past her, racing toward the exit. The whispers morphed into anguished cries, echoing in my ears like a distressing symphony as I dashed through the door and into the night. The cool air hit me like a slap across the face, invigorating yet chilling, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the edge of the property, desperate to escape the suffocating grip of the end that clung to my very soul. As I stumbled into the woods, the trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky, encroaching upon the moonlit clearing. I could hear the whispers creeping behind me, growing fainter but still persistent, an ominous reminder of what I had left behind. I ran until my legs burned, exhaustion clawing at me, until I could no longer hear the haunting calls that echoed through the night. Eventually, I emerged into a clearing, panting heavily, the moon hanging high above, casting a silvery glow over the landscape that felt both surreal and alien to me. I felt a moment of relief wash over me, a temporary reprieve from the terror that had chased me, but it was short-lived. The shadows began to creep back, slithering through the underbrush like living entities, and I knew I had to keep moving if I didn't want to be engulfed by their darkness. Just as I turned to flee again, I caught sight of the inn in the distance, its windows glowing like predatory eyes in the darkness, watching, waiting. I felt an inexplicable pull, an overpowering compulsion to return despite every rational thought screaming at me to run the other way. Against my better judgment, I found myself walking back toward it, each step heavy with dread and apprehension. Inside, the woman awaited me, her expression a mixture of pity and something darker, a twisted understanding of my plight. You shouldn't have run, she said softly, her voice dripping with an unsettling calm. Now they know you're here, and you cannot hide. Before I could respond, the shadows surged forward, swirling around me like a storm, a vortex of darkness that threatened to consume me whole. I felt them tugging at my very essence, pulling me into their depths, their freezing cold invading my bones. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the cacophony of whispers that echoed through the hall, a multitude of voices crying out, their words merging into a chaotic symphony of despair. Suddenly, I was back in my room, lying on the bed as if nothing had happened, everything reverted to its prior state. The morning light streamed through the window, warm and inviting, illuminating the once menacing shadows, but I knew better than to trust it. I bolted upright, heart racing, the remnants of terror still coursing through my veins, and rushed to the door, eager to escape this waking nightmare. The hallway was empty, and the inn was eerily quiet, an unsettling stillness pervading the air. I stumbled down the stairs, desperate for escape, my hands trembling as I reached for the door handle. The front door swung open, and I dashed outside, the fresh air hitting my face like a welcome embrace, a reminder of life and freedom beyond these cursed walls. But as I looked back, I saw the woman standing in the doorway, her smile hauntingly serene, void of compassion. "You can't leave," she called out with a chilling calm, her voice echoing in the stillness like the tolling of a distant bell. "You belong to us now." The weight of her words crashed down on me, a horrifying realization that sent me spiraling back into despair. I turned and ran, the pressure of her words pressing down on me, suffocating. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as panic surged through me like a tidal wave. I jumped inside and slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest as if trying to escape its confines. As I sped away, the inn faded into the distance, becoming a blurred memory of brick and wood, but I could still feel the shadows clinging to me, whispering promises of return that echoed in the recesses of my mind. I drove for hours, the road stretching endlessly before me, twisting like the thoughts swirling in my head, but no matter how far I went, I could still sense their presence lurking in the back of my mind, haunting my every thought. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to forget the horrors of that night, trying to convince myself it had all been a figment of my imagination. But the whispers never truly faded. They sat just beneath the surface like a dark river waiting to rush forth. They haunted my dreams, creeping into my thoughts like an unwelcome guest that wouldn't leave. I could feel their cold fingers brushing against my skin whenever I was alone, a chilling reminder of the inn and the woman who had drawn me into her world of shadows. One restless night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring out the window, the moonlight casting long shadows across my room, shifting and twisting across the floor. I thought of the inn, of the haunting faces in the portraits lining the walls, and the woman with her knowing smile that followed me relentlessly. The memories flooded back, washing over me like an old, familiar tide, and I felt a pull, a deep longing to return despite the fear that gripped my heart. I shook my head violently, trying to dispel the thoughts, but it was too late. The shadows had seeped into my very being, intertwining with my soul, and I knew I could never truly escape their grasp. I was forever marked by that night at the forgotten inn, bound to the whispers that called me back to its sinister embrace. And deep down, I understood the unsettling truth: the shadows never forget, and they would always be waiting for me to wander back into their embrace, ready to claim me as one of their own, forever lost among the echoes of the damned. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. I remember those warm summer days vividly, when everything felt vibrant and alive, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting golden rays over the shimmering waters of Black Cove. It was a place filled with laughter and freedom, where my friends Cooper, Henry, and I would escape from the mundane realities of life. We had spent countless weekends camping there, sharing stories around a crackling fire, and swimming in the cool, inviting sea. Those days were a sanctuary for us, a refuge from the pressures of school and work. But everything changed one fateful day, forever altering our lives. It was a Saturday, the kind of day that beckons you to the beach, urging you to bask in the sun and feel the sand between your toes. The air was thick with the scent of salt and pine as we set up our campsite, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks providing a soothing backdrop. Cooper, always the adventurous one, suggested we take a swim. "Come on! The water's perfect," he urged, his eyes sparkling with excitement and mischief. Reluctantly, Henry and I followed him into the water, feeling the refreshing embrace of the ocean wash over us. The ocean was a delightful escape from the heat, and we splashed around, laughing and joking, the joy of friendship enveloping us. But as the minutes passed, I began to notice something unsettling. The waves started to grow stronger, pulling at us with a force that felt almost alive, as if the ocean had a will of its own. I glanced at Cooper, who was swimming farther out, his silhouette slowly fading against the horizon, becoming just a dark shape amidst the rolling waves. "Cooper! Come back!" I shouted, my voice barely rising above the roar of the waves. He turned, flashing a grin that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if he was daring the ocean to challenge him, taunting the very depths that could consume him. Then, In an instant, everything changed. A massive wave crashed over him, and when it receded, Cooper was gone. Panic surged through me as I screamed his name, my heart racing in my chest. Henry and I swam frantically, searching the churning water, but it was as if the sea had swallowed him whole, leaving no trace behind. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the world around me begin to spin. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. We alerted the authorities, and a search party combed the area tirelessly, but Cooper was nowhere to be found. His family arrived, their faces etched with despair and disbelief, and as the sun set on that dreadful day, they accepted the grim reality. Cooper was lost to the sea, perhaps forever. The following weeks were a blur of grief and guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him somehow, that I should have done more to save him. Henry and I attended Cooper's memorial, surrounded by friends and family who shared their memories of him, each story a reminder of the vibrant spirit we had lost. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of my own life, burdened by the weight of what had happened, unable to move forward. Time passed, but the shadows of that day lingered like a dark cloud over us. Henry and I often found ourselves reminiscing about Cooper, our conversations tinged with regret and sorrow. One evening, as we sat in my living room, the silence heavy between us, an idea struck me. What if we go back to Black Cove? I suggested, my voice trembling at the thought. Maybe we can find some closure, some way to honor his memory. Henry hesitated, his brow furrowing as he considered the suggestion, but I could see the flicker of determination in his eyes. We owe it to him, he finally agreed. So, we made plans to return to the cove, hoping to confront our demons and perhaps find some semblance of peace amid the turmoil. When we arrived, the air was thick with memories, each breath filled with the echoes of laughter and joy that once filled the space. The campsite looked almost untouched, as if time had stood still, preserving the innocence of our past. The waves still crashed against the shore, but now they felt ominous, a haunting reminder of that terrible day when everything changed. As we set up our tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, as if the very spirits of the cove were aware of our presence, silently judging our return. That night, we sat around the fire, sharing stories of Cooper, laughing through the tears that threatened to spill over. But as the flames flickered and danced, an unsettling chill crept into the air, wrapping around us like a cold embrace. I glanced toward the ocean, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the water, transforming the familiar landscape into something sinister. What if we could somehow communicate with him? I mused, half-jokingly. Maybe he's still out there, trying to reach us. Henry chuckled nervously, but I could see the unease in his eyes. You really think so? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged, but deep down, I felt a strange pull toward the water, as if it held secrets waiting to be uncovered, truths that could only be revealed through the depths of the ocean. The next day, we decided to explore the area around the cove, hoping to distract ourselves from the heaviness in our hearts. As we wandered along the rocky shore, we stumbled upon a path that led to a hidden cove, one we had never noticed before. Curiosity piqued, we followed it, our hearts racing with anticipation and a sense of adventure. As we ventured deeper, we discovered an old, weathered lighthouse standing sentinel over the cliffs, its presence both imposing and captivating. Its paint was peeling, and the glass in the lantern room was fogged with age, but there was something undeniably alluring about it, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. Let's check it out, I suggested, feeling an inexplicable urge to explore, to uncover the stories hidden within its walls. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of salt, remnants of years gone by. The spiral staircase creaked under our weight as we ascended, each step echoing in the silence that surrounded us. At the top, we found ourselves in the lantern room, the view breathtaking and expansive. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, a vast expanse of blue, but something felt off. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in this place. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the small lantern we had brought with us. Panic surged as darkness enveloped us, swallowing the light. "Henry?" I called out, my voice trembling with fear. "Are you there?" "I'm here," he replied, his tone equally frightened, the tension palpable. "What just happened?" Before I could respond, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the sound of the crashing waves outside. "Help me!" The voice was hauntingly familiar, and my heart raced as I realized it sounded like Cooper, a chilling echo of the past. "Cooper?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the darkness, filled with desperation. "Is that you?" The whisper grew louder, more insistent, as if urging us to respond. "Help me! Find me!" Without thinking, I bolted down the stairs, Henry close behind me, our hearts pounding in unison. We rushed outside, the salty air filling our lungs as we searched the shoreline, scanning the horizon for any sign of our friend. "Where are you, Cooper?" I yelled, desperation clawing at my throat, threatening to choke me. Then, as if summoned by my call, a figure emerged from the shadows of the cove. It was Cooper, or at least, it looked like him. His clothes were tattered, and his skin was pale and clammy, as if he had just risen from the depths of the ocean. But his eyes held a familiar spark, a glimmer of hope. "Help me," he pleaded, extending a hand toward us, desperation etched on his face. "Cooper!" I cried, rushing forward, my heart soaring with hope. But as I reached for him, he faded into the mist, leaving only a chilling echo of his voice behind. "Help me!" I stumbled back, breathless and disoriented, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. "What just happened?" Henry gasped, his face pale with shock, disbelief etched in his features. "Was that really him?" "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing, uncertainty flooding my mind. "But we have to find him. We can't leave him here." We scoured the cove, calling out for Cooper, but there was no response, only the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the water, and a sense of dread settled over us, heavy and suffocating. "Maybe we should go back to the lighthouse," I suggested, my voice trembling as fear gripped my heart. As we returned to the lighthouse, the air felt charged with energy, crackling with an intensity one couldn't explain. We climbed back to the lantern room, hoping to find answers to the questions swirling in our minds. The whispering wind seemed to carry Cooper's voice, guiding us, beckoning us to listen. "Help me! Find me!" Suddenly, the lantern flickered back to life, illuminating the room in a warm glow. In the light, we noticed a dusty journal lying on the floor, its pages yellowed with age and filled with the stories of the past. I picked it up, flipping through the entries, and discovered it belonged to the lighthouse keeper, detailing strange occurrences and sightings of lost souls in the cove. One entry caught my eye. "The sea holds many secrets, and those who seek them may find themselves lost forever. Beware the call of the water. It is a siren's song that lures the unwary into its depths." My heart sank as I realized the truth. Cooper hadn't just disappeared. He had been taken by the very essence of the cove, ensnared by its dark allure. The whispers were a warning, a plea for help from those who had succumbed to its sinister pull, trapped in a cycle of despair. "We have to save him," I said, determination flooding my veins, igniting a fire within me. "We can't let him be trapped here forever." Henry nodded, fear etched on his face, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "But how? We don't even know where he is, or how to reach him." "We'll have to confront the water," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "We have to go back into the ocean, back to where it all began." As we made our way to the water's edge, the waves crashed violently against the rocks, as if warning us to turn back, to abandon our quest. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "Cooper!" I shouted, my voice ringing out over the tumultuous sea, filled with a mix of determination and dread. "We're coming for you." With that, we plunged into the icy water, the shock of the cold hitting me like a jolt of electricity. The waves surged around us, pulling us deeper into the cove, dragging us into the very depths of our fears. I fought against the current, calling out for Cooper, hoping he could hear me, hoping he was still there. As we swam, the darkness enveloped us, the water pressing down like a heavy weight, suffocating and disorienting. I felt a presence beside me, and for a moment, I thought it was Henry. But when I turned, I was met with a ghostly figure, its eyes hollow and its mouth moving in silent screams, a visage of despair. "Help me!" it wailed, reaching for me with skeletal fingers, its voice a chilling reminder of the lost souls that roamed these waters. I recoiled in horror, realizing it was one of the lost souls, trapped in the depths of the cove, seeking to drag others into its torment. "Keep swimming!" I shouted to Henry, my heart racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We had to reach Cooper before it was too late, before the darkness consumed us as well. Suddenly, I spotted a flicker of light beneath the surface. "There!" I cried, diving deeper, my heart pounding with hope. The light grew brighter, illuminating a figure tangled in seaweed. "Cooper!" I reached out, grasping his hand, and pulled him free from the watery grave. His eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and fear, as he looked at us through the haze of the water. "Jack?" "Henry," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the roar of the waves, a whisper of the boy we once knew. "We're here. We're getting you out." I shouted, relief flooding my heart, but as I turned to swim back to the surface, the water around us began to churn violently. The lost souls surged forward, their hands grasping at us, trying to drag us down into the abyss, to claim us as their own. "Fight them!" I yelled, my heart pounding in my chest, desperation fueling my movements. "We can't let them take us!" With every ounce of strength, we swam upward, pushing against the tide, the darkness swirling around us. The souls wailed, their cries echoing in my ears, a cacophony of despair, but I focused on the surface, on the light breaking through the water. We were so close to freedom. Just as I thought we would make it, a cold hand grasped my ankle, pulling me down into the depths. I screamed, desperation flooding my veins, panic clawing at my throat. "Help! Henry! Cooper!" But just as I felt myself being dragged under, I felt a strong grip on my arm. It was Henry, pulling me back to the surface, fighting against the tide. "Don't let go," he shouted, determination etched on his face, a fierce resolve that ignited a spark of hope in me. With one final push, we broke through the surface, gasping for air, the moonlight bathing us in silver, illuminating the chaos around us. I could see Cooper floating beside us, his eyes wide with shock, disbelief etched in his features. "We did it!" I gasped, relief flooding through me, but as I looked around, I realized the souls were still reaching for us, their cries echoing in the night, a haunting reminder of the darkness we had just escaped. "We have to get to the shore." Together, we swam with all our might, the waves crashing around us, each stroke a battle against the forces that sought to claim us. Finally, we reached the beach, collapsing on the sand, gasping for breath, the weight of our ordeal crashing down around us. The souls wailed in frustration, their cries fading into the distance as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. We lay there, exhausted and trembling, the weight of what we had just experienced settling over us like a heavy blanket. Cooper looked at us, confusion and gratitude mingling in his eyes. The boy we had lost now returned. "What happened?" "I thought I was lost forever," he whispered, the reality of his return slowly dawning on him. "You were," I replied, my voice shaking, the truth heavy on my heart. But we found you. We fought for you. As the sun rose over Black Cove, casting a warm glow over the water, I knew we had faced something unimaginable, something that would forever change us. The cove held its secrets, dark and deep, but we had survived, and in that survival, we had reclaimed a piece of Cooper's spirit, a flicker of hope amidst the despair. But even as we walked away from the beach, the warmth of the sun on our backs, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cove would always be a part of us, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. And somewhere deep down, I knew that the call of the water would always beckon, a siren song that would never truly fade away, forever echoing in the depths of our memories. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. I never imagined that insomnia would evolve into my closest companion, a relentless presence that shadowed my every waking moment. Initially, it manifested as just a few sleepless nights scattered here and there, moments of restlessness that I thought I could easily overcome. However, this minor inconvenience quickly spiraled into an unending cycle that consumed my entire life, leaving me feeling trapped in a dark labyrinth with no exit in sight. I used to pride myself on being a healthy individual, someone who could handle the stresses of life with grace. But the mental toll of this condition began to erode my sanity, piece by piece. It felt as though a dark cloud had settled over me, blocking out all the light and joy that once filled my days, leaving me in a state of perpetual gloom. After weeks of tossing and turning, of staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn broke through my window, I finally reached a breaking point. I decided to seek help from a therapist, hoping she could guide me through this overwhelming darkness. Sitting across from her in her softly lit office, I felt a mix of vulnerability and despair wash over me. She listened intently as I poured out my heart, sharing my struggles and fears, her brow furrowed with concern as she took in my words. "You need to keep a sleep diary," she suggested gently but firmly. "If things don't improve, we might need to consider medication." I nodded in agreement, but deep down, a wave of fear washed over me. What was happening to me? Why couldn't I escape this torment that had become my new reality? Determined to take control of my situation, I started forcing myself to track my sleep patterns meticulously. Each night, I would jot down the time I crawled into bed, the moments I spent staring blankly at the ceiling, and the exact time I finally succumbed to sleep, only to be jolted awake by some unseen force in the dead of night. My diary quickly filled up with entries, but instead of clarity, I found myself drowning in confusion. My mind felt like a chaotic whirlwind, spinning out of control, and the anxiety that accompanied it was suffocating, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. As the nights dragged on and sleep continued to elude me, I began to rely on sleep aids, hoping they would help me drift off into a peaceful slumber. But each pill felt like a mere band-aid on a deep, festering wound, a temporary fix that did nothing to address the root of my problem. I closed my eyes, my body utterly drained from exhaustion, but my mind was relentless, racing through a maze of thoughts that refused to quiet down. During those long, lonely hours, I started sensing a presence lurking in the shadows, just out of sight, watching me. At first, I dismissed it as a figment of my exhausted mind, a trick my brain was playing on me due to sheer fatigue, but the feeling grew stronger and more unsettling with each sleepless night that passed. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself distancing from friends and family, isolating myself like a hermit trapped in my own apartment. The outside world felt both distant and unwelcoming, a place I no longer belonged. I couldn't engage in conversations or participate in social gatherings, feeling like a ghost drifting through a purposeless life. The laughter and joy that once filled my days faded into an echoing silence, leaving only the haunting sound of my own thoughts. I was trapped in a nightmare that wouldn't end, and I felt powerless to escape its grasp. One particularly dark night, after yet another failed attempt to sleep, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring into the darkness that enveloped me. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, almost inaudible but unmistakably clear, cutting through the silence. My heart raced as I strained to listen, my breath hitching in my throat. The words were indistinct, but the tone was chilling, laced with an unsettling familiarity that sent shivers down my spine. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear creeping into my chest, telling myself it was just my imagination, just the remnants of a sleepless mind playing tricks on me. But the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent, weaving themselves into the fabric of my thoughts. They called to me, beckoning me to join them in the shadows, promising solace and understanding. I felt an inexplicable urge to respond, to reach out and touch whatever was lurking just beyond my perception. It was a dangerous curiosity, one that threatened to pull me deeper into the abyss from which I feared there would be no return. I resisted, but the allure of the unknown was strong, and I found myself teetering on the edge of surrender. Days turned into weeks, and my grip on reality began to slip away like sand through my fingers. I could no longer distinguish between the whispers of my mind and the voice of the entity that haunted me, a constant presence that seemed to thrive on my fear. I became obsessed with uncovering the source of this presence, convinced that understanding it would somehow set me free. I scoured the internet for answers, delving into forums and articles about sleep disturbances, nightmares, and paranormal phenomena. Each theory I encountered only deepened my confusion, feeding the darkness that had taken root within me and growing stronger with each passing day. Desperation eventually led me to a local support group for insomnia sufferers. I walked into the dimly lit room, feeling like an outsider among the weary faces of those who understood my plight. As we shared our stories, I realized I was not alone in my struggle. Others spoke of similar experiences, of shadows that moved in the corners of their vision and voices that echoed in the stillness of the night. It was both comforting and terrifying to know that I was not the only one haunted by the specters of sleeplessness, yet it also filled me with dread to think that so many others were suffering in silence. Yet, as I listened intently to their accounts, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if the presence I felt was not a mere figment of my imagination? What if it was something far more sinister, a dark force that thrived on our collective fear? The idea gnawed at me, a relentless whisper that refused to be silenced, growing louder with each passing moment. I became consumed by the notion that I was being watched, that the entity was waiting patiently for me to succumb to my fears and insecurities. One night, after a particularly harrowing day filled with anxiety and dread, I decided to confront the darkness head-on. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my trembling resolve, I ventured into the shadows of my apartment, determined to face whatever lay hidden within. I moved from room to room, illuminating the corners with my beam of light, but the darkness seemed to swallow the glow whole, as if mocking my efforts. I felt foolish, like a child playing make-believe, but the compulsion to face my fears was overpowering, urging me to push forward. As I reached my bedroom, the air grew thick with an oppressive weight, pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. I could feel the presence closing in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The whispers escalated into a cacophony, a chorus of voices urging me to give in, to surrender to the darkness that beckoned. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, caught between terror and curiosity. What awaited me in the depths of my mind? What truths lay hidden beneath the surface of my fear? Suddenly, I heard a distinct voice rise above the rest, cutting through the chaos like a knife. It was soft yet commanding, resonating deep within me, stirring something I had long buried. "Join us," it urged, its tone both inviting and sinister. "Embrace the darkness." My breath hitched as I felt an overwhelming pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer to the abyss that threatened to consume me. The walls of my reality began to crumble, and I teetered on the edge of a precipice, staring into the void. In that moment of clarity, I realized the truth. I had been fighting against something that was an intrinsic part of me. The darkness was not an external force to be vanquished, but a manifestation of my own fears, insecurities, and unresolved traumas. I had spent so long trying to escape it, to deny its existence, that I had unwittingly given it power over me. It was time to confront my demons, to face the shadows I had long avoided. With newfound determination and a sense of purpose, I took a deep breath and stepped forward into the darkness. I embraced the shadows, allowing them to envelop me completely. The whispers transformed into a symphony, a haunting melody that resonated with my soul, echoing the struggles I had faced for so long. I felt a sense of liberation wash over me, as if I had finally acknowledged the parts of myself I had long suppressed and hidden away. As I surrendered to the darkness, I understood that it was not something to be feared, but an essential part of my journey toward healing. I began to see the beauty in the chaos, the flickering light that danced within the shadows. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound sense of peace that settled over me like a warm embrace. I was no longer a prisoner of my insomnia. I was a survivor, emerging from the depths of despair with newfound strength. With each passing night, I learned to navigate the depths of my mind, to explore the labyrinth of my thoughts without fear. I sought professional help, embracing therapy as a means to unravel the knots of my past and confront the issues I had long buried. I began to reconnect with the world around me, reaching out to friends and family I had pushed away during my darkest days. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my life, brick by brick, reclaiming the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. Insomnia still visits me at times, a reminder of the struggles I have faced, but I no longer view it as an enemy. It has become a part of my story, a chapter filled with lessons and growth that have shaped me into who I am today. I have learned to dance with the shadows instead of running from them, finding strength in the very darkness that once threatened to consume me. And in that dance, I have discovered my resilience and capacity for healing. As I lay in bed each night, I remind myself that I am not defined by my sleeplessness or my struggles. I am a tapestry woven from both light and dark, and within that complexity lies my resilience, my ability to rise from the ashes of despair. The whispers may still linger in the corners of my mind, but they no longer hold power over me. I have faced my fears, embraced my darkness, and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever comes next on this journey called life. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. I often find myself lost in the echoes of my childhood, particularly those stormy nights in the small, haunted town where I grew up. The memories are a jumble of fear and fascination, woven together with the sound of thunder and the flickering of candlelight. My mother used to tell me stories about the spirits that roamed our town, tales that both terrified and intrigued me. As a child, I never truly understood the gravity of her warnings, nor did I grasp the true nature of the darkness that lurked just beyond our doorstep, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The storms in our town were unlike any other I had ever encountered. They rolled in with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient, dark clouds swirling like a living entity, threatening to engulf everything in their path. I remember the first time I truly felt the weight of fear during one of these storms. My friends and I would gather in my living room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation and dread, waiting for the thunder to crack like a whip and send shivers down our spines. We would huddle together, whispering about the monsters that we believed lurked in the shadows, our imaginations running wild with each flash of lightning that illuminated the darkened sky. One particular evening stands out vividly in my mind, forever etched into my memory. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if trying to break in and join us in our fearful sanctuary. My friends, Alex and Sarah, were with me, and we were transfixed by the storm, our eyes wide with both fear and excitement. It was as if the tempest had awakened something deep within us, a primal curiosity about the unknown that beckoned us to explore. We dared each other to peek out the window, to see what lay beyond the safety of our home, the walls that had always felt so protective. As I stood by the window, the world outside was illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning. In that brief moment, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was tall and thin, its limbs elongated and twisted in unnatural angles that defied logic. I could feel a chill creep down my spine, a sense of dread washing over me that I had never experienced before. It was a fear that gripped my very soul. "Did you see that?" I whispered, turning to my friends, who were now wide-eyed and pale, their faces reflecting the same terror I felt. They nodded slowly, fear evident in their expressions, and the weight of the moment settled heavily upon us. We had always joked about monsters, but this felt different. This was real, and it was watching us, lurking just beyond the safety of our home, waiting for the right moment to strike. The storm raged on, but our laughter had died down, replaced by a heavy silence that enveloped us like a suffocating blanket. We decided to retreat to the safety of the basement, a place my mother had always warned us never to go during storms. "The spirits are restless," she would say, her voice low and grave, a warning that echoed in my mind. But curiosity got the better of us, and we crept down the creaky stairs, the air growing colder with each step we took into the unknown. In the basement, the shadows seemed to dance around us, and the flickering light from the lone bulb overhead cast eerie shapes on the walls, distorting our fears into tangible forms. We huddled together, whispering about what we might find, our imaginations running wild with every creak and groan of the old house. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the fear that coursed through my veins. Suddenly, a loud crash of thunder shook the house, and we all jumped, our hearts racing in unison. It was then that we heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the far corner of the basement, a sound that sent chills down my spine. My stomach dropped, and I felt a primal instinct to flee, to escape the terror that threatened to consume us. But instead, we stood frozen, eyes wide with terror as the growl grew louder, morphing into a chilling laughter that echoed off the walls, reverberating in the very core of our being. "Let's get out of here!" Alex shouted, breaking the spell that had us ensnared. We bolted up the stairs, adrenaline fueling our escape, our feet pounding against the wooden steps as we raced toward the light. As we reached the top, I glanced back, and for a fleeting moment, I saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the depths of the basement, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The storm eventually passed, but the fear it instilled in me lingered like a dark cloud hovering over my mind. I became increasingly anxious whenever dark clouds gathered in the sky, dreading the thought of another storm. The memories of that night haunted me, replaying in my mind like a broken record, and I found myself avoiding storms at all costs. I would lock myself in my room, the sound of rain tapping against the window a constant reminder of the terror that lurked just outside, waiting for me to let my guard down. Years went by, and I thought I had left those fears behind, buried deep within the recesses of my mind. However, one fateful night, as I returned home after a long, exhausting day, dark clouds began to gather overhead, ominous and foreboding. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and I felt a familiar sense of dread settle in my stomach like a heavy stone. I hurried inside, seeking refuge, but the storm broke with a vengeance, and I was trapped once again. As the wind howled outside, I tried to distract myself with television, but the power flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I could hear the rain pounding against the roof, the sound echoing like a drumbeat in my ears, a relentless reminder of the chaos outside. Memories of that fateful night in the basement flooded back, and I felt the walls closing in around me, suffocating me with their oppressive weight. In a moment of panic, I decided to check the basement. Perhaps facing my fears would finally rid me of the nightmares that had plagued me for years, the shadows that had haunted my thoughts. I grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness that seemed to cling to me like a shroud. As I reached the bottom, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of dread that washed over me like a cold wave. The air was cold and still, and I could hear the faint sound of dripping water echoing in the silence, a reminder of the darkness that lurked within. I shone the flashlight around, illuminating the cluttered space, but there was nothing unusual until I heard it again. The guttural growl resonated through the basement, sending chills down my spine, igniting the primal fear that lay dormant within me. My heart raced as I turned the beam towards the sound, my hands trembling with trepidation. There, in the corner, stood the same figure I had seen years ago, its form more defined in the dim light. It was taller than I remembered, its limbs grotesquely elongated, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent light that seemed to draw me in, threatening to consume me whole. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, echoing in the confined space. I was trapped. The figure moved closer, its laughter echoing in the confined space, a sound that chilled me to the bone and froze me in place. I scrambled for the door, pounding on it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge, the darkness pressing in around me. In that moment of sheer terror, I realized that I was not just facing a monster, I was confronting the very embodiment of my fears, the manifestation of all the darkness I had tried to ignore. The storm outside raged on, but the real tempest was within me, a battle of wills that threatened to tear me apart. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the horror, and in that darkness, I found a flicker of courage, a spark of defiance that began to grow. I opened my eyes and faced the creature, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "You're not real," I shouted, my voice trembling but defiant, echoing in the silence of the basement. "You're just a figment of my imagination, a nightmare that I can control." To my surprise, the figure paused, its laughter fading into silence, as if my words had struck a chord. I took a step forward, emboldened by my own resolve, feeling the weight of fear begin to lift. "You have no power over me," I declared, and with each word, I felt the grip of fear loosening its hold on me, like chains breaking free. The creature's form began to waver, the glowing eyes dimming as I stood my ground, refusing to back down. The basement felt less oppressive, the shadows retreating as I faced my childhood fears head-on, unafraid of the darkness that had once consumed me. With one final shout, I pushed against the door, and it swung open, the storm outside fading into the background, the chaos giving way to a sense of calm. I stumbled up the stairs, gasping for air as I emerged into the light of the living room, the warmth of safety enveloping me. The storm had passed, the thunder replaced by the soft patter of rain, a soothing melody that washed away the remnants of fear. I had faced the darkness, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my power, my strength. From that day on, I no longer feared the storms. They became a reminder of my strength, a testament to the battles I had fought within myself, a symbol of resilience that I carried with me. The haunted memories of my childhood transformed into lessons of bravery, and I learned to embrace the storms, both outside and within, knowing that I had the power to weather any tempest that life threw my way. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. It was just another late night at the university library, a place where the echoes of rustling pages met the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I had always considered myself a night owl, finding solace in the quiet stillness of the library, which stood in stark contrast to the chaotic clamor of campus life that thrived during the day. As I settled into my usual corner, surrounded by towering shelves filled with knowledge. The weight of looming deadlines hovered over me like a suffocating fog. Little did I know that tonight would be far from ordinary. It would become a night etched into my memory forever. The library was sprawling, with thick shelves filled to the brim with textbooks, journals, and countless volumes of knowledge waiting to be explored. The dim lighting cast long, eerie shadows that danced along the walls, creating the perfect backdrop for stories of the supernatural that often circulated among students. I had heard whispers among my peers about a creature that supposedly haunted the lower levels of the library, a malevolent presence that thrived on fear and loneliness. They said it had claws long enough to slice through flesh as easily as a knife through butter, capable of inflicting unimaginable terror. Yet, I brushed it off, believing that such tales were simply that, tales, woven to entertain and frighten, nothing more than figments of overactive imaginations. As the hours dragged on, I immersed myself in my studies, my mind racing with thoughts of assignments and exams. Occasionally, I glanced at the clock, noting how each tick seemed louder than the last, echoing in the quiet space. My focus began to waver, but it was nothing compared to the sensation that began creeping over me, a chill that settled deep in the pit of my stomach. It started as a faint murmur, almost like the flutter of wings, but quickly morphed into something far more sinister. The crying began softly, a mournful wail that penetrated the silence of the library, sending a shiver down my spine. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, as the echo wrapped around me like a shroud, suffocating and inescapable. I glanced around, my eyes darting nervously. The library was desolate, the only company the towering bookshelves that loomed over me like silent sentinels. Anxiety coiled in my chest as the crying grew louder, more pained and desperate. An instinctual urge to flee gripped me, yet curiosity held me anchored to my seat. What could possibly make such a sound in a place dedicated to knowledge and learning? What horror could lurk in the shadows of this sanctuary? Compelled to investigate, I marked my pages and began wandering toward the source of the noise, my heart racing with each step. The deeper I ventured into the stacks, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Each shelf loomed over me like dark sentinels, and the oppressive silence swallowed every sound I made, amplifying the cries that echoed through the air. As I approached the lower levels, a sense of dread washed over me, a primal instinct screaming that I needed to turn back, to escape before it was too late. Yet, the crying intensified, almost pleading now, as if it were calling out for help. It lured me closer, a twisted siren song that beckoned me into its depths, promising answers I knew I should avoid. As I rounded a corner, I stumbled upon a narrow stairwell that spiraled down into darkness, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the light. My mind raced with panic, but the morbid curiosity inside me pushed me forward. I had to know what was behind it, what truth lay hidden in the depths of the library. With each step I took, the air grew thick with an unnatural chill that wrapped around me like a vice. I hesitated on the last step, peering into the abyss of the basement. The dim light barely illuminated the room, revealing rows of forgotten texts, dust-covered and neglected, as if they had been abandoned for centuries. My heart thudded loudly in my ears, drowned by the cries that now resonated like a choir of despair, each note striking a chord of terror within me. Then, my eyes fell upon a shadow lurking in the far corner of the room. I could barely make out its shape, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold, predatory, and hungry. My body screamed at me to escape, to run back up those stairs as fast as I could, but I stood frozen, gripped by a mix of fear and fascination. The cries transformed into guttural sobs, and I could feel something clawing at the edges of my sanity, threatening to pull me into the darkness. Suddenly, the figure moved. It was swift, silvery against the shadows, and I barely had time to process what I saw, something indistinct but undeniably menacing, with elongated limbs and claws that glistened like sharpened metal, ready to strike. As it hurled itself toward me, a primal scream erupted from deep within my chest, a raw expression of terror. I turned to flee, the adrenaline surging through my veins, propelling me back up the stairs, each step feeling like a desperate bid for survival. I stumbled, heart racing, breathing heavily, knowing that whatever that creature was, it was right behind me, closing in with every frantic step I took. I could hear the rustling of its movements, the sound of claws scraping against the concrete floor, echoing like a heartbeat that matched my own. I dashed through the maze of books, my vision blurring as terror clouded my thoughts. I had to get to safety, had to warn someone, anyone, about the horror that lurked in the depths of the library. Emerging into the main floor, I gasped for breath, scanning the room for anyone who might help, anyone who might believe me. But the library was a ghost town at this hour. I was alone, wholly and terrifyingly alone, the oppressive silence wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The creature's cries were now mingled with my own frantic breaths, creating a symphony of despair that echoed in my mind. With every ounce of strength, I ran toward the exit, praying that the heavy doors would open easily and allow me to escape this nightmare. As I reached for the door, a chill swept through the room, and I could feel the weight of dread pressing down harder than before, a tangible force that threatened to crush me. The creature's cries morphed into a cacophony of laughter that echoed in my mind, taunting me as I struggled against the door. I flung it open and spilled out onto the campus grounds, where the cool night air filled my lungs like a sweet reprieve from the terror behind me. I didn't look back as I sprinted away from the library, fueled by an instinctual need to survive, to escape the clutches of that unseen horror. Every shadow felt like a watchful eye, and every rustle in the bushes sent shockwaves of fear coursing through me. I didn't stop until I reached my dormitory, where I finally collapsed against the door, sweating and trembling, my body still reeling from the adrenaline that coursed through my veins. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted, the sensation that I was not alone, even in the safety of my own room. I tried to confide in friends, but they laughed off my tale, dismissing it as the product of an overworked mind, a figment of stress-induced imagination. Yet, I knew what I had seen. I could still hear the cries, haunting me with memories of that night, echoing in the corners of my mind. It wasn't just a creature, it was a manifestation of fear festering in the hearts of every student who dared venture into the depths of the library, a dark reflection of our own insecurities and vulnerabilities. I avoided the library after that, but my resolve began to wane as deadlines approached, the pressure of academia weighing heavily on my shoulders. Each time I passed by its imposing structure, I could feel its pull, an eerie allure wrapped in shadows that whispered promises of knowledge and understanding. I would catch whispers from students, those who had ventured close enough to claim they saw it, a nightmare lurking just out of sight, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to prey upon. Eventually, I could no longer resist the call of my studies, guilt creeping in like a persistent fog that clouded my judgment. I convinced myself that I was being foolish, that it was just a figment of my imagination reborn from stress. So, I returned one fateful night, a sense of foreboding sitting heavily in my chest, a warning I chose to ignore. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, heart racing, expecting the worst. I navigated through the rows of shelves, anxious but resolute, determined to conquer my fears. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of that dreadful presence, my instincts on high alert. The library felt different, thicker, charged with an energy that made me want to run away, a sense of impending doom hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to unleash its fury. I focused on my studies, trying to ignore the overwhelming dread that loomed over me. Hours passed, and then, the unmistakable sound of crying echoed through the stacks once more, cutting through my concentration like a knife. All the courage I had summoned evaporated as fear took hold, wrapping around me like a vice. I knew that sound too well. It was a siren summoning me back into the depths of despair. This time, I wasn't going to let it pull me in again. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the exit, racing against the encroaching darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. The cries became a cacophony as they chased me through the aisles, each wail echoing in my mind, urging me to turn and face the horror I had tried to escape. I felt the weight of it behind me, the malevolent entity gaining ground with every frantic step I took. My heart pounded violently against my ribcage as I neared the exit, the light of the outside world beckoning me like a lifeline. I could hear the scraping of claws on the floor, echoing my own frantic steps, a reminder that I was not alone. Finally, I burst through the doors and into the night, collapsing on the grass as I gasped for air, my lungs burning with the effort. I looked back at the library, its haunting silhouette illuminated by the moonlight, a fortress of knowledge that had turned into a domain of terror, a prison for those who dared to seek its secrets. That night solidified my fears. The library wasn't just a collection of books, it harbored something ancient, something that feasted on fear and despair, thriving in the shadows of ignorance. I knew, deep down, that I would never truly escape it. The knowledge I sought was overshadowed by the shadow I had encountered, a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest corners hide more than just forgotten stories waiting to be rediscovered. From that day on, I became a different person, forever changed by the realities of what lay beneath the surface of my once beloved sanctuary. The library, with its eerie cries and lurking terror, served as a constant reminder that knowledge can be a double-edged sword, and not all stories have a happy ending. I had learned that some truths are better left undiscovered, hidden away in the darkness where they belong, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon them. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. After my father's death, a heavy silence enveloped our home, wrapping around us like a dense fog that refused to lift. My mother seemed lost in a deep fog of grief, her eyes distant and vacant, as if she were gazing into another world. I often found myself wandering the halls of our once vibrant house, searching for traces of the life we once shared, memories that now felt like ghosts. It was during one of these aimless strolls through the dimly lit corridors that I stumbled upon an old photo album, dust-covered and forgotten in the attic, hidden away like a secret. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of nostalgia washed over me, bringing back fleeting moments of joy and laughter, but it quickly morphed into unease when I found a name that sent chills down my spine: Bosco. I had never heard of Bosco before, yet the name felt hauntingly familiar, like a shadow lurking just beyond my memory. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding, to confront my mother, hoping she could shed light on this mysterious figure. "Mom, do you remember anyone named Bosco?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly with a mix of excitement and fear. She looked at me, confusion knitting her brow, and shook her head slowly. "No, I don't recall anyone by that name," she replied, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion, as if the name meant nothing to her. Frustration bubbled within me, igniting a fire of determination. "But Dad must have known him. There's a picture of him in the album." I pressed, desperate for a connection to my father's past, a thread that could pull me closer to understanding who he really was. My mother's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition sparking in her eyes. "Your father did mention a friend named Bosco once, long ago. But I don't remember the details." "It was before you were born," she said, her voice trailing off as if the memories were too painful to revisit. The mention of my father's friend ignited an insatiable curiosity within me. I needed to know more about Bosco and the secrets my father had kept locked away. My mind raced with possibilities, each more sinister than the last, weaving a tapestry of intrigue and dread. I remembered the stories my father used to tell me about the Shelton Forest, a place where shadows danced and the wind whispered secrets, carrying tales of lost souls. It was said that an ancient oak tree stood in the heart of the forest, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands, beckoning those who dared to approach. Driven by an unquenchable thirst for answers, I made up my mind to venture into Shelton Forest. Perhaps the oak tree held answers to the questions swirling in my mind, or at the very least, it would bring me closer to understanding my father's past and the man he had been. I packed a small backpack with essentials, water, a flashlight, and a small shovel, and set out early the next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting a golden hue on the world as I stepped into the unknown. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its trees standing like ancient sentinels guarding secrets long forgotten. As I stepped beneath the thick canopy, the air grew thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The trees towered above me, their trunks twisted and gnarled, each one a testament to the passage of time and the stories they held. I followed a narrow path, each step echoing in the silence, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound accompanying me. The deeper I went, the more the atmosphere shifted, a palpable tension hanging in the air like an electric charge. After what felt like hours of walking, my legs weary and my heart racing, I finally spotted the old oak tree. It was massive, its bark rough and weathered, a testament to the countless seasons it had endured. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of anticipation and dread swirling within me. As I stood before the tree, I felt an inexplicable urge to dig, a compulsion that tugged at my very core. What lay beneath its roots? What secrets were buried there? I knelt down, heart racing, and began to excavate the earth, my hands trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. With each scoop of soil, a sense of dread washed over me, creeping into my bones. The ground was cold and damp, and the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with an ominous presence. I continued to dig, driven by an unseen force, until my hand struck something hard. I brushed away the dirt and gasped, my breath catching in my throat. It was a bone, pale and brittle, protruding from the earth like a grim reminder of the past, a chilling revelation that sent shivers down my spine. Panic surged through me as I frantically cleared away more soil, my mind racing with horrifying possibilities. The truth revealed itself in horrifying clarity. There were more bones, 4 in total, each belonging to a young woman. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My father was connected to this. The thought spiraled through my mind, each turn more terrifying than the last, a dark web of secrets threatening to ensnare me. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I tried to process what I had discovered. How could my father have been involved in something so monstrous, so unfathomable? The name Bosco echoed in my mind, a ghostly whisper that seemed to taunt me, mocking my ignorance. Who was he, really? What dark secrets did he share with my father, and what had transpired in this very forest? As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of lives lost, I felt a presence behind me, an icy chill creeping up my spine. The air grew colder, and I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach like a heavy stone. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, shrouded in shadow, his presence suffocating. My breath hitched as I squinted, trying to make out the details. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by the darkness. But I could see his eyes, piercing and cold, like twin shards of ice that seemed to penetrate my very soul. Who are you? I managed to croak, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with fear. The figure stepped forward, and a chill ran down my spine as I recognized him. It was Bosco, the name that had haunted my thoughts. Your father spoke of me, he said, his voice low and gravelly, resonating in the stillness of the forest. He was a man of ambition, willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. His words dripped with malice, each syllable laced with a darkness that made my stomach churn, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What did you do? I demanded, anger and fear intertwining within me like a tempest. What happened to those women? Why are there bones here? Bosco chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. They were merely obstacles in your father's path. He wanted power, and I helped him attain it. But power comes at a cost, doesn't it? A price that must be paid in blood. I felt my world shatter around me, the ground beneath me seeming to tilt. My father, the man I had idolized, the person I had looked up to all my life, was a murderer. The weight of the truth pressed down on me, suffocating and unbearable, a darkness threatening to consume me. Why are you here? I asked, my voice trembling, desperate for answers. To remind you, Bosco replied, stepping closer, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light that sent chills down my spine. You carry his blood. The darkness runs in your veins. You have a choice to make. What do you mean? I whispered, fear clawing at my throat, my heart racing as I struggled to comprehend the implications of his words. You can embrace it, or you can run from it, he said, his voice a seductive whisper that wrapped around me like a shroud. But know this, the past never truly dies. It lingers, waiting for the right moment to resurface, to claim what is rightfully its. As he spoke, I felt a strange pull towards him, a dark allure that beckoned me to step closer, to give in to the shadows that danced at the edges of my mind. I shook my head, trying to resist the temptation. No! I'm not like him! I shouted, but doubt crept into my mind, whispering insidiously. What if I was? What if the darkness within me was waiting to be unleashed, eager to follow in my father's footsteps? Bosco smiled, a chilling expression that sent a wave of dread coursing through me. We shall see, he said, his form beginning to fade into the shadows, the forest swallowing him whole. The oak tree holds more secrets than you can imagine. Dig deeper, and you may find what you're truly looking for. With that, he vanished, leaving me alone in the clearing, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air like a dark cloud. I stared at the bones, the reality of my father's legacy crashing over me like a tidal wave, dragging me under. I felt lost, trapped in a nightmare from which I could not awaken, the echoes of the past reverberating in my mind. Days passed, and I found myself unable to shake the encounter with Bosco. I returned to the oak tree repeatedly, compelled to uncover more of the truth that lay buried beneath the surface. Each time, I dug deeper, unearthing more bones, more secrets that begged to be revealed. I learned the names of the women, their stories echoing in my mind like a haunting melody that refused to fade. They were vibrant, full of life, and yet they had met tragic ends at the hands of my father and his twisted ambitions. The forest became both my sanctuary and my prison, a place where I could confront the darkness that surrounded me. I was drawn to it, unable to escape the pull of the shadows that whispered secrets in the wind. I began to lose track of time, my thoughts consumed by the mysteries of my father's past and the chilling presence of Bosco. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I found myself spiraling into a dark abyss, each day blending into the next, the forest becoming my only companion. One night, as I sat beneath the oak tree, the moon casting an ethereal glow over the clearing, I felt a presence beside me. I looked up to see Bosco standing there, his eyes glinting with a predatory hunger that sent a shiver of fear through me. Have you found what you were looking for? He asked, his voice smooth as silk, wrapping around me like a dark embrace. I want to know the truth, I replied, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me from within. I want to understand why this happened, why my father did what he did. Bosco smiled, a cruel twist of his lips that sent a chill down my spine. The truth is a double-edged sword. It can set you free, or it can bind you to your fate. Are you prepared to embrace it, to accept the darkness that lies within you? I hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. What do you mean? What am I supposed to do? Your father's legacy lives on within you, he replied, his voice dripping with a sinister allure. You have the power to continue his work, to carry on his twisted ambitions, or to break the cycle. But know this, the darkness is always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness to consume you whole. I felt a shiver run down my spine as his words sank in, burrowing into my mind like a parasite. The choice lay before me, and I was terrified of what it meant. How do I break the cycle? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice, my heart pounding in my chest. Face your fears. Embrace the darkness, and you will find the strength to overcome it, he replied, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light that promised power and knowledge. But remember, once you step into the shadows, there's no turning back. You may find more than you bargained for. With that, he vanished again, leaving me alone with my thoughts, the echoes of his words resonating in the stillness. I stared at the ground, the bones glinting in the moonlight, and I knew I had to make a choice. The darkness was calling to me, whispering promises of power and knowledge, seducing me with its allure. But at what cost? What would I have to sacrifice to embrace the legacy that was mine by blood? I spent the following days wrestling with my demons, the battle within me raging like a tempest. The forest became both a refuge and a prison, the oak tree a constant reminder of the choices I had to make. I could feel the darkness within me stirring, a primal urge to embrace the legacy my father had left behind, to step into the shadows and claim my birthright. One fateful night, I returned to the oak tree, the moon casting an eerie glow over the clearing, illuminating the path to my destiny. I knelt before the roots, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I'm ready, I whispered, the words slipping from my lips like a vow, a promise to myself and to the lost souls that lingered in the shadows. As I began to dig once more, the earth felt different, charged with energy, as if the very ground was alive with anticipation. The bones seemed to pulse beneath my hands, and I could hear whispers in the wind, urging me on, pushing me to uncover the truth. I dug deeper, my hands trembling with anticipation and fear, each scoop of earth bringing me closer to the answers I sought. Suddenly, I struck something solid. I cleared away the dirt, revealing a small, ornate box, intricately carved with symbols I couldn't decipher. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it, revealing a collection of photographs, images of the women whose lives had been cut short, their faces frozen in time. But there was something else, a journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with the scrawled handwriting of my father. I opened the journal, and my heart raced as I read my father's words. He spoke of ambition, of power, and of the sacrifices he had made to achieve his goals. He had been consumed by darkness, and in his quest for greatness, he had lost everything, including his humanity, his soul. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth. My father had been a monster, and I had inherited his legacy, a burden I was not sure I could bear. But I also had the power to break free, to forge my own path, to choose a different destiny. The darkness might be a part of me, but it didn't have to define me. As I closed the journal, a sense of clarity washed over me, cleansing me of doubt and fear. I would not let my father's choices dictate my fate. I would honor the memory of the women he had wronged by choosing a different path, one of light and redemption, a path that would lead me away from the shadows. With newfound determination, I buried the box and the bones beneath the oak tree, sealing away the darkness of the past, the weight of my father's sins. I stood up, taking one last look at the ancient tree, and felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden released. The whispers of the forest faded, replaced by a sense of peace that washed over me like a gentle tide. I turned away from the oak tree, ready to embrace a future free from the shadows of my father's legacy. The darkness might always be a part of me, lurking in the corners of my mind, but I would choose to walk in the light, honoring the lives lost and the choices yet to be made. I was determined to carve out a new identity for myself, one that would rise above the horrors of the past, and I would not let the darkness claim me. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. It was an ordinary night, the kind where the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the world below. The streets glistened with the remnants of a recent rain, and the air was cool and crisp, filled with the earthy scent of wet pavement. I was driving home, the hum of my car's engine providing a comforting backdrop to my swirling thoughts. Everything seemed perfectly normal until it all changed in an instant. As I rounded a bend, my headlights suddenly illuminated a figure standing in the road. Time slowed, and before I could even process what was happening, I felt the sickening thud beneath my tires. My heart dropped into my stomach, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as I skidded to a halt. I stumbled out of the car, my hands shaking uncontrollably as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The dim light from my headlights revealed a man lying motionless on the asphalt, his body twisted at an unnatural angle that made my stomach churn. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, and I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to answer, the weight of what I had done crashed over me, suffocating me with guilt and fear. I had taken a life, and the enormity of that realization was almost too much to bear. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end asked, but I could barely form coherent words. My mind raced, replaying the moment of impact over and over again, each replay more horrifying than the last. I was terrified, guilt gnawing at my insides like a ravenous beast, and I felt as if I might collapse under the weight of it all. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the beam of my headlights. He was a young man, perhaps in his 20s, with an unsettling calmness about him that made me uneasy. His eyes glinted with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel that he knew more than he was letting on. "Are you all right?" he asked, though the concern in his voice felt hollow, almost rehearsed. I glanced back at the man on the ground, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, the reality of the situation hitting me harder than ever. I hit him, I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's not moving. I think he's dead." The young man nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment. "Yes, I know," he said, stepping closer, his demeanor unnervingly relaxed in the face of such horror. "I'm his colleague," he added, as if that somehow explained everything. "You've done something extraordinary tonight." "Extraordinary?" I echoed, bewildered and incredulous. "I killed him. How can that be extraordinary?" He smiled, a strange, knowing smile that sent chills down my spine. "Not just anyone can say they've killed the devil." My blood ran cold at his words, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "His name was Samuel," the young man explained, his voice smooth and almost hypnotic. "But he was more than just a man. He was a powerful entity, a force of darkness. And now, you've taken his place." I shook my head in disbelief, my mind struggling to grasp the implications of his words. "This can't be happening. I don't want this. I didn't ask for this." "Too late," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact, as if delivering a simple truth. "You've inherited his powers. You have the potential to be so much more than you ever imagined." "What powers?" I asked, my voice trembling, a mixture of fear and curiosity swirling within me. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy shroud, suffocating and confusing. "You can manipulate shadows, bend the will of others, and even see the truth behind their facades," he said, his eyes glimmering with excitement, as if he were unveiling a great secret. "But with great power comes great responsibility. You must learn to control it, or it will consume you." I stumbled back, my mind racing with disbelief and fear. This was insane. I had just killed someone, and now I was supposed to become some kind of supernatural being? "I can't do this," I said, desperation creeping into my voice, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on my shoulders. "You don't have a choice," he insisted, stepping closer, his gaze piercing through the fog of my panic. "You've awakened something within you. Embrace it, or it will destroy you." As the sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. I didn't want to believe him, but something deep within me stirred, a dark curiosity that I couldn't ignore. What if he was telling the truth? What if I could wield power beyond my wildest dreams? The young man extended his hand, a gesture both inviting and foreboding, as if he were offering me a choice that could change the course of my life forever. "Come with me. I can help you understand your new abilities. But you must be willing to accept your fate." I hesitated, glancing back at the scene of the accident, my heart racing. The flashing lights were growing closer, and the reality of my actions loomed large, casting a shadow over everything I had ever known. I was terrified, but a part of me was intrigued by the idea of power, of control over my own destiny. With a deep breath, I took his hand, feeling an electric jolt surge through me as our fingers touched. In that moment, I knew I was crossing a line from which there would be no return, stepping into a world that was both exhilarating and terrifying. As we stepped into the shadows together, I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The world around me shifted, the air thick with an otherworldly energy that crackled with potential. I was no longer just a man. I was something more, something darker, and I was both exhilarated and terrified by the prospect. The young man led me to a hidden place, a realm that existed between reality and the abyss, a place filled with whispers and shadows. Here, the very fabric of existence felt fragile, as if it could unravel at any moment. It was a world where I would learn to harness my newfound abilities, but I also knew I would have to confront the darkness within myself, a darkness that threatened to consume me whole. Days turned into weeks as I trained under the young man's guidance. I learned to manipulate the shadows, to bend them to my will as if they were extensions of myself. I discovered the truth behind the people around me, their hidden desires and fears laid bare before me like open books. It was intoxicating, empowering, and yet terrifying all at once, a heady mix of exhilaration and dread. But with each new skill I mastered, I felt the darkness within me grow. I became increasingly detached from my old life, from the man I once was. Guilt and fear were replaced by a ravenous hunger for power, a desire to dominate and control everything around me. I found myself drawn to the shadows, to the thrill of wielding the darkness that had once terrified me. I began to test my abilities, pushing the boundaries of what I could do. I sought out those who had wronged me, seeking vengeance in ways I had never imagined possible. The thrill of retribution coursed through my veins, intoxicating and addictive, and I reveled in the chaos I could unleash with just a thought. But with every act of darkness, I felt a part of my humanity slipping away, like sand through my fingers. I was becoming a monster, a reflection of the very entity I had killed. The young man watched me with a mix of pride and concern, his eyes betraying a hint of fear as he saw the transformation taking place within me. "Remember, you are not just a vessel for power," he warned one night as we stood in the shadows, the air thick with tension. "You must choose who you want to be. The darkness can consume you if you let it." I brushed off his words, my mind clouded by ambition and the intoxicating allure of power. I was no longer the man who had hit someone on that lonely road. I was a force to be reckoned with, a being of darkness and shadow. I craved more, and I was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it, no matter the cost. But as I delved deeper into this new existence, I began to notice changes around me. Friends became distant, loved ones turned into strangers, their faces blurring into the background of my life. The more I embraced the darkness, the more isolated I became, trapped in a web of my own making. One night, as I stood on the edge of a rooftop, looking down at the city below, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness wash over me. I had gained everything I thought I wanted: power, control, respect, but I was utterly alone. The power I had sought so desperately felt like a chain, binding me to a fate I no longer understood, a prison of my own design. The young man appeared beside me, his expression grave as he took in my turmoil. "You're losing yourself," he said softly, concern etched across his features. "This isn't what you wanted, isn't it?" I shot back, anger flaring within me, desperation creeping into my voice. "I have power. I can do anything." "But at what cost?" he pressed, his voice steady and calm. "You've sacrificed your humanity for a fleeting sense of control. You're not the man you used to be, and you're in danger of losing everything." His words struck a chord deep within me, resonating with a truth I had tried to ignore. For the first time, I questioned the path I had chosen, the choices I had made. I looked down at the city, the lives I had disrupted, the darkness I had spread like a plague. Was this truly what I wanted? In that moment of clarity, I realized that I had to make a choice. I could continue down this dark path, embracing the power that consumed me, or I could fight to reclaim my humanity, to find a way back from the abyss that threatened to swallow me whole. With a heavy heart, I turned to the young man, my voice barely a whisper as I spoke. "I want to change. I want to be free of this darkness that is suffocating me." He nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "It won't be easy, but it's possible. You'll have to confront the darkness within you, face the consequences of your actions, and take responsibility for what you've done." As I took a step back from the edge, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. I knew it wouldn't be easy to undo the damage I had done, but I was willing to try. I was ready to fight for my humanity, to reclaim the life I had lost in the shadows. And so, with the young man by my side, I embarked on a new journey, a journey of redemption. I would face the darkness, not as a vessel of power, but as a man seeking to make amends for the life I had taken and the monster I had become. In the end, I learned that true power lies not in domination and control, but in the courage to confront our own demons and seek forgiveness. And as I stepped back into the light, I knew that I was no longer just an apprentice of the devil. I was a man fighting to reclaim his soul, determined to restore the humanity I had lost along the way. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. When I stepped into this bustling city, my heart was brimming with dreams and hope for the future. I was an idealist at heart, always believing that if I worked hard enough and put in the effort, my dreams would eventually come true. However, the grueling job search process drained me completely. After months of sending out countless resumes and attending numerous interviews, I found myself yielding no results whatsoever. Each day felt like a battle, and every morning, I would look in the mirror and encourage myself, saying, "Today will be different. Today is the day things will turn around." Through the endless cycle of disappointment and setbacks, my dear friend Alan stood by my side, providing unwavering support. He was my rock during this turbulent time. But as the weeks turned into months, I could see that even his confidence was beginning to waver. We often met up to discuss our future possibilities, sharing our hopes and fears, even though I was starting to doubt my own abilities and worth. It was a tough time for both of us, and I could sense the weight of uncertainty hanging over our conversations. Finally, on a particularly cloudy afternoon, I received a call that changed everything, a call for an interview. I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw the notification. I had found my dream job. It was with a prestigious company that seemed to have a unique standing in the industry, one that was well respected and renowned. I didn't care about the specifics or the fine print. I just wanted to get my foot in the door and change my life for the better. I felt a rush of excitement and couldn't wait to share the good news with Alan, who I knew would be just as thrilled as I was. "This is amazing. You have to tell me everything about it." Alan's voice was filled with anticipation and enthusiasm, and I could feel his excitement radiating through the phone. However, from that day on, I began to feel something strange shifting within me. It was as if a dark cloud was settling over my mind. I started having insomnia at night, tossing and turning in bed, and dark, unsettling images would flash through my mind, as if something was lurking just out of sight, refusing to let me rest or find peace. On the day of the interview, I put on my best suit, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement swirling inside me. As I walked into the company, a cold wind hit me, sending a chill down my spine, and it felt like everything was shrouded in an ominous darkness. The interviewer was a grim middle-aged man with deep, cold eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I tried my best to appear confident and composed, but his gaze felt like a knife, cutting into my very soul. I noticed he kept emphasizing the importance of loyalty and isolation within the company's culture, which left me feeling uneasy. As the interview progressed, the discussion took a bizarre turn. He mentioned some rather peculiar requirements for the position, including no family ties and complete personal commitment. Each of his words felt like an invisible rope tightening around my throat, constricting my breath and making me feel trapped. I felt fear creeping in, but my desire for this job suppressed my unease, pushing me to ignore the warning signs. A few days later, I received a call that I had been hired. Excitement and fear intertwined in my chest, making it difficult to discern whether my choice was right or wrong. I eagerly shared the news with Alan, but a hint of worry crossed his face as he listened. "Have you really thought about the requirements of this job? It sounds a bit extreme, don't you think?" "This is the opportunity I've been dreaming of, Alan. I can't pass it up," I said excitedly, but he just sighed deeply and fell silent, leaving me to wonder if I was making a mistake. In the days that followed, more and more unsettling details began to surface in my mind. The job required me to work all night at the office, and every time I approached the company's cold storage area, I felt a chilling threat looming over me, a sense of dread that settled in my stomach. A feeling of unease began to wash over me, and I couldn't shake it off. One day, when I got home after a long shift, I found a message from Alan waiting for me. He expressed his growing concern for my safety and suggested that I quit the job. But at that moment, a whispering voice began to echo in my ears, as if calling me deeper into this dark abyss. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I couldn't escape its pull. Still, I continued to work, and I began to notice that more colleagues were disappearing at night, vanishing without a trace. For the first time, I really paid attention to the company motto emblazoned on the walls: "For the benefit of all humanity, reject all close relationships." The words felt like a warning, and a strong feeling of unease surged within me until one day I finally mustered the courage to investigate after work. On the company forum, I stumbled upon several hidden threads discussing company disappearance incidents, filled with eerie and terrifying details. Many people had lost themselves in this job, even their closest loved ones, and it sent chills down my spine to read their stories. And I seemed to be sinking deeper and deeper into this bottomless darkness. In my dreams, I saw Dan, his face blurry and distorted, as if he were speaking words I couldn't comprehend. Every time the night grew quiet, I could feel a pair of eyes watching me from behind, making my skin crawl. Eventually, I made the decision to escape this place, to break free from the chains that bound me. But when I got to my apartment, I found it completely empty, devoid of all my belongings, except for that abandoned suit hanging on the rack. My heart sank into my stomach. Alan, my home, everything I had ever known had disappeared in one single night. I frantically searched everywhere, and what chilled me even more was when I found a strange job advertisement in my bedroom. It clearly stated, "The lonelier you are, the easier it is to succeed." I tried to make sense of it, but the words sent shivers down my spine and filled me with a sense of helplessness, as if an invisible force was pulling me deeper into the darkness. At that moment, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. A strong sense of unease washed over me, making it impossible for me to refuse the call. "This is a job you can't refuse. Dan is doing well with us," the voice on the other end said. Fear washed over me like a tidal wave as I pulled out a business card from my pocket, and I discovered it bore the company's name, causing me to tremble uncontrollably. I slumped helplessly to the ground, knowing that I could no longer escape this nightmare. From that point on, my life would be intertwined with this dark reality, as if I had become part of this twisted world. A whispering voice echoed in my ears, urging me to accept my new fate, to embrace the darkness that surrounded me. There was no doubt that my future was now sealed in this inescapable job. I could no longer find the dreams I once had, only endless darkness awaited me, and I knew that Dan's fate would inevitably become my own. All right, that's the end of today's story. Thank you for joining me on this thrilling journey through the shadows of life and death. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the little bell to get more spine-chilling tales from Whisper of Horror. Remember, every soul has a story, and here, we give them a voice. See you next time. Stay curious, stay cautious, and keep whispering horror.